Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video. And in today's video, I'm going to be predicting the Davis versus Berinchyk fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So I'm going to start my kind of formatting of videos and make it a little bit different. And so basically, instead of giving the main overview of the main event, we're going to start by going through the undercard fights, building our way up to the main event. So I'm going to give that main overview and also talk about each fight individually before I give my main event prediction. And so we'll start off by just listing a few fights that just wanted to touch a little bit upon on the undercard. And we're not going to do a predictions for these ones, but yeah, just a few. So Keon Davis is of course another person who's going to be on this card. He's a name in which is Keyshawn Davis's brother. I'm pretty sure he's got another brother, so I think there is who's also a professional boxer, and so Keyshawn Davis is really kind of progressing his family name as well as his state's name, his kind of area's name as well with Norfolk. Like, there's not really many big American fighters from Norfolk, and so he's really kind of, like I say, bringing along that place as well, but also bringing along his family as well and progressing them. And Keon Davis is only 1-0 at the moment, but I'm sure he's going to get a lot of attention and probably is going to get moved on really well and going to get that backing from Top Rank, all because of the name in which his brother has. And so you've got to respect Keyshawn Davis for wanting to keep his family on his shows and everything like that. And then Ali Walsh, of course, another name in which has been floating around with Top Rank for a little while now, and of course the, I believe, grandson of the great Muhammad Ali. And obviously he's not quite lived up to the expectations, as I mean anybody would have had for a grandson of Muhammad Ali. And to be honest, there is definitely so much pressure there, so much expectation there, and it's going to be difficult to be able to live up to that pressure. But he had that kind of blimp earlier on in his career, but it seems like he's back on track at the moment, and I think it's going to be a very long time, in my opinion, or quite a few fights before he really gets put in against a very tough test. And so that's no real surprise, to be completely honest, because he is, got that big name, and he has shown that weakness already in his career. Like I mentioned, I feel like it is going to be quite a bit of time before we see him gets put in with a great test. But for the moment, he's around and he's back fighting again, and he's a good name to have for Top Rank. And then Mason versus James is another fight. I think this is a great fight, to be completely honest. I mean, Abdullah Mason, 16-0 now. Young guy himself. A lot of these Top Rank fighters are young fighters, and still progressing their way and improving with each fight so much. And Mason is coming off a dramatic fight last time out, where it was a candidate for Fight of the Year, or even Round of the Year, when he got dropped and he dropped his opponent, and then he dropped his opponent again. And yeah, it was just an intense back and forth, and it was definitely, I'd imagine, not what Mason was expecting from the opponent in which he had, because he wasn't really, too known of an opponent. But it maybe shocked things a little bit, and he managed to get still another nice, very nice knockout win, and he's been progressively doing them and been looking really good whilst doing so, and definitely has that big following now as a result of that. But that was that bit more of a test, and this definitely could be a test as well. I mean, James is coming off the loss versus Roland Romero, but he was on a good run beforehand and definitely still has the potential to really cause problems for Mason. And it could be what I think it is, the most difficult contest in which Mason has had so far. So it is nice to see Top Rank putting Mason in with a good tough contender, a good tough fighter. And like I mentioned, I just feel like this could be another tough test for Mason. But perhaps if he gets through this, like we've seen, Romero has then gone on to now fight, or going on to now fight Garcia. Perhaps Mason could go on to fight a big fight after this. I think he's more than ready to, main event at a big stage, to be completely honest. But for now, hopefully he can pick up another big stoppage victory, and carry on the progression in which he has been having so far. Polanco versus Torres is another good contest as well. I think, to be honest, a lot of these fights on these cards are good contests and great names to be on this card. I think it's a very stacked card, and Torres versus Polanco again is another good fight. Polanco now 14-0, aiming to become 15-0. There are some great contenders around in the top ranked scene, and another one which, to be honest, is in a much different position to that of Polanco at this point in his career. I mean, it's Jared Anderson. Anderson is fighting Colias as a comeback fight after the devastating defeat versus Martin Piccoli. A lot of people were saying that Jared Anderson was thrown in too soon in that fight, and to be honest, I suppose you could argue that would be the case, but at the same time, Piccoli hadn't quite proven himself at a world level and needed a tough fight like Anderson to really prove that. So, for Anderson going into that fight, he was on a great run and was looking like an excellent heavyweight. He was a young one coming through and he wanted to test himself. So, I don't really always agree with or like fans saying that fighters, shouldn't have been put in with this guy because it was too difficult of a test too soon in their career, because that's you want to see the young guys really keen and up for a good test. It doesn't mean that they can't get back to a high world level again, and I feel like Jared Anderson definitely has that potential ability to get back to a high world level. Yes, it might take a few more fights to rebuild and get back to it, and yes, his confidence may have been knocked, and yes, his mindset may be different, but I feel like that's more important than anything for a young fighter coming through to be in them tough tests. He got really badly beaten up versus Martin Piccoli. Maybe you don't have to go to that level of getting beaten up, but still, like I say, developing mentally and trying to get yourself back into this world level heavyweight scene is going to be difficult for Anderson, but this fight will definitely prove it. There's been a lot of cases as of recent where we have seen heavyweights struggle after a defeat, and that being at a world level. And so, we will have to wait and see how he deals with Colias. It's definitely a much of a step down in opponent, but I think it was always going to be. And it's just nice to see him back active. He definitely could have had more time out, and there wasn't really too much talk of him fighting until all of a sudden it got announced that he is fighting, and so I was expecting that he would take a bit of time, take a bit longer time out, and we won't hear about him for a couple of years. But as a young heavyweight, he should be returning back fighting after having a bit of time to recover mentally. I don't think his chin's gone or anything like that, because it is still early on in his career, and I think it was just a blip in his fighting, a blimp in his fighting career so far, and I just would like to see him back fighting, and of course he is. And so, it's going to be an interesting contest to see if he can get back to the entertaining style in which he once was at. But of course, we will have to wait and see. And again, like I mentioned, Top Rank have been putting on these great shows. This is a very stacked card. Like I say, I'm going to give some predictions for two more of the fights on the undercard, but they are often very good at keeping their fighters active. I mean, how many times in recent times have we seen a Richard Torres and Abdullah Mason, uh, Xander Zayas, who was also, of course, on this card, uh, Bruce Carrington, Keyshawn Davis as well, all these kind of names who are great prospects and, at this point progressing to actually fighting for world level, really getting put often on card after card after card. It's just great to see. It really helps the fans connect with these fighters as prospects and makes them build a fan base really well. And I feel like Top Rank are very good at helping their fighters create a fan base and a hype around them, even though perhaps sometimes they are a little bit restrictive as to when they're actually going to push their fighter and put them into that really tough test. But for the most part, they've done this really well with Keyshawn Davis, and I think this is his time. He has this amateur background, perhaps he hasn't had a crazy amount of professional fights, but this is a good time for him to get thrown into this fight. And there's a few other fights on this undercard in which perhaps they could be progressed a little bit further, and I would like to see them perhaps fighting a little bit further along in their career against tougher fighters at this point in their career, if that makes sense. And just as an example of this, Xander Zayas versus Spomer. Yes, Zayas is really young. He's 22, I believe, and to be 20-0 with at 22 is very impressive. And Spomer is, much older. He's in his 30s, I believe, and he's also 20-0. So perhaps, on paper it will be an even matchup. I also think it might be an even matchup, but I just think the likes of Zayas, Mielnicki Jr., who's also on this card, definitely could have been progressed, maybe a little bit quicker at this point in their careers. I feel like they both could have been knocking on the door for world titles at this point, but instead they're fighting fights in which aren't eliminators for world titles, I believe, and aren't, quite progressing them to the big names in which people know as of yet. But, to speak more about Zayas versus Spomer, it's a good fight. I think Spomer is definitely coming in as an underrated fighter, and I think definitely could have a lot of success. I think Spomer is going to be trying to be up close fighting Zayas with the fueled up style in which he has. And Zayas did get caught in his last fight, fighting in close a little bit. For the most part, he got the most of the success, and he showcased his head movement really well, and his fight IQ and his general defensive movement was very good, and he was often getting his punch off first. But Spomer, I feel like, might offer that bit more of a different test, and that, like I say, a bit more of a fired up test when he gets up close and personal with Zayas. And I think Zayas is going to win via split decision. I think it's going to be a tough fight. I think it's going to be a much tougher fight than any Top Rank fans are expecting, or even, to be honest, that Xander Zayas is expecting. And I think, like I mentioned, Spomer is going to come into this, try and be on the chest of Zayas and try and throw his shots. The only things that I feel like are going to go against Spomer, I suppose, mainly is the fact that he drops his guard so much. I think Zayas can definitely just consistently land shots because he is going to drop his guard, but I think Spomer will definitely have success, and I think he will be really fired up for this fight because this is such a big fight for him, and definitely the biggest one in his career. And he is entertaining and he is funny, I suppose, to watch when he is just so fueled up. And if he definitely could hurt Zayas, it wouldn't surprise me if he even drops Zayas at some point and really gets that shocking moment. But I still believe Zayas will be able to grind out point score, make it messy into the later rounds. I'm sure it will be a split decision victory, and perhaps a showing that maybe Zayas isn't quite ready for the world title fights yet. But I also think at the same time, if you wait around these fringe world level guys, which are ranked opponents but aren't quite going to get you straight into a world title shot if you beat them, there's definitely that risk there where you're going to get caught out, you're going to get shown up. And when you have got this big expectation upon you, like somebody like Zayas has, it's definitely, could get to a point where he could get surprised with somebody like a Spomer. He could really underestimate somebody like a Spomer, and that's where he could perhaps, maybe not lose the fight, but get dropped, get hurt, or make a fight harder than on paper it should be. And so I feel like this fight definitely could be that. And like I say, I still believe as the home fighter as well, it would make sense for the most part. And I think if it will go to I think it will go to a close decision, and that Zayas will be able to win. And then moving on, Mielnicki Jr. versus Coyle. This is again another interesting matchup. It's another guy in Mielnicki Jr. who again is very young. I think 22 as well, and perhaps could be progressed in a little bit further along in his career at this point. But I don't mind this matchup versus Coyle. Coyle is somebody who, for the most part, really has gone under the radar and just picked up wins. I mean, they both had the same amount of fights, but Coyle is that much older in 34. I feel like he kind of had gotten to a point in his career where he had to really go for a big fight for this fight, and this is a big fight for both of the fighters, arguably the biggest fight for both of the fighters. I think Mielnicki Jr. is going to win by a TKO in round 9. I think he's going to be that much sharper, that much faster, that much more accurate, and perhaps going to show that more power than that of Coyle. I don't think Coyle is a bad fighter, But I mean, I saw his last fight when he fought in Barnsley on the undercard of Callum Simpson, and it was against much lesser opponent than that of Mielnicki Jr. I know Mielnicki Jr. hasn't fought anybody too incredible, but that Coyle performance wasn't anything too crazy. It wasn't a showing where he should be a 21-0 fighter. I don't really think he should have been fighting guys at that level. You'd imagine it was a keep active type fight, but at the same time, he hasn't really been tested too much. And like I say, I just feel like Mielnicki Jr. can pick up a big stoppage win here by being that bit faster, that bit sharper, and that bit more accurate out of the two. I feel like they do have a bit of a similar type of style, but like I say, I think Mielnicki Jr. with the youthfulness on his side is going to be that much better. And then I would love to see him progress on to a really big fight as a result of it, because beating an unbeaten 21-0 fighter, even if the record is that bit more padded, is still a big feat and an impressive win. And like I say, I really feel like I would love to see him progress on than just being on, top rank undercards or Showtime undercards, even though, yes, he is still really young, but yeah, like I said, I would just like to see him move on that bit more after perhaps, well, in my opinion, winning versus Coyle. Now to start speaking, about the main events, Davis versus Berinchyk, why we are all here to talk about a big fight like this. And, Davis perhaps surprised me with the fact that he even was wanting this fight as a world title fight. Berinchyk perhaps is coming off a performance versus Navarrete where it wasn't the best of performances. It didn't really wow everybody. Perhaps it surprised people the fact he was able to beat Navarrete, but Navarrete has been shown to be very inconsistent at times. But Davis has seen this perhaps as a weakness in Berinchyks' game, and I think Davis is just seeing this as an easier way to get a world title fight. Do you kind of blame him? No, because he is, like I say, he is wanting a world title tough test, and he has the amateur background. He's coming off a great, perfect homecoming victory versus Lemos, where, to be honest, when you see homecoming fights, quite often or not, they won't go as well as that one did for Davis. And, I thought he'd lose the fight, to be completely honest. I thought it would all be too much, but the way that he was able to land the shots looked much more impressive than that of Hitchens when Hitchens fought Lemos. Even with Lemos coming in much heavier overweight, he looked very powerful, Davis, in his work. Will he be that powerful again versus Berinchyk now? We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, he has kind of now moved away from being that of a top rank prospect, and he's gone through the levels, through the route, and has built his stardom. He definitely showed that he has that stardom capabilities with that homecoming performance last time. The whole of Norfolk got really behind him, and it was a big event. It was a big show. It wasn't just you know, a small hall type of fight or a fight in which not really too many people cared about. There was a big fan base there to support Davis, and he's definitely a popular guy, and he's an entertaining guy. His fights are entertaining, and they are interesting as well, and he has been putting on great shows whilst also fighting. I mean, he was dancing away versus Lemos when Lemos was dropped. He was just, really getting the crowd going onto his side, and he's definitely building that star status. And so he's definitely moved away from being that of a prospect now, and he has that more so potential to be a star because he has the perfect rivalry, that being Andy Cruz. Will that fight ever happen? Hopefully. And will it happen soon? Hopefully. It could happen this year. It could happen next year. Or it could never happen. It could happen in 10 years. Cruz has, he's not as young as what people would think he is. I believe he's 27, even though he's still very early on in his professional game. He stayed around the amateurs for a much longer time than that of Davis, and had that great rivalry versus Davis where they were both going back and forth, and there was that spite between the two of them, and there is that fact that Cruz has one-upped Davis and nobody has been able to one-up Davis in the professionals, And we also saw Cruz go up to Davis and kind of give him that handshake, and it was a little bit awkward, and you could tell there was that little bit of needle there between the two of them. And I definitely think, even though Cruz doesn't speak English, it definitely has the potential to be that perfect rivalry in which every star boxer, when you look at them, they have them really great rivalries. And like I say, this definitely has the potential to be one, and will just be interesting to see if we will see it this year. Cruz perhaps may have to have one or two more fights before he gets to a world level, but he's definitely not far off. That win versus Salcido was a great win for him, and so if Davis is to win this one, I would give him a lot of credit if he was to straight away kind of call out Cruz and to invite him onto that world scene, but I just kind of doubt it, to be completely honest. And Berinchyk, definitely, of course, somebody in which you can't overlook, underestimate. He isn't really your, I suppose, typical Ukrainian style, but at the same time, he kind of seems like he's trying to be. He's not as fast, he's not as accurate, and he's not as controlled as that of a Lomachenko or Alexander Usyk, and I don't think he has as good of a fight IQ as either of them, but he has them weird, awkward, bouncy type movements, and he makes it hard to be pinned down, and he finds moments to land singular shots and have success and point score, and so he's definitely a unique test, a tough test, and a test in which was definitely able to be too much for Navarrete, and that fight gave him a name. Berinchyk was not really, a bit of a nobody to an extent before the Navarrete fight. I mean, he'd had a couple fights outside of Ukraine where he'd picked up, relatively big wins and was able to get himself into that kind of world level position, but he's never really had too many big fights, and perhaps you blame that down to the fact that he is, from Ukraine. It's not exactly, I suppose, a country that it's that easy to get opportunities from. Obviously, there has been some excellent Ukrainian world champions, but for the most part, it is difficult to get out of there. If your country isn't known for being a boxing country and it's not known for, really giving loads of opportunities, and perhaps you're coming from a tough upbringing, it's going to be difficult to find success, and perhaps that's why Berinchyk, at the age of 36, is only just getting, the credit in which perhaps he deserves at this point in his career. Maybe he could have been more successful. Maybe he could have learned his craft to a better, even better level, if he was able to have the opportunities earlier on in his career, earlier on in his life. But obviously, he's 36 and he's a world champion now at this point, so at least he has gotten to that point. But he is definitely seen as arguably the weakest of champions in the lightweight division, which is, still no discredit, because there are some excellent, of course, champions world champions in the lightweight division. Something I did want to, touch upon is obviously Berinchyk stopped Navarrete from becoming a four-time world champion. If Davis beats Berinchyk, does that mean that Davis is arguably better than Navarrete? Of course, he hasn't achieved anywhere near the same level of success as of yet, but does that mean that he is skilled better? I'm not too sure. It's just a debate because, of course, the weight is different, and Navarrete was coming up in weight, he wasn't used to it, and Davis, this is his weight. He is a lightweight, and so that's just, again, like I say, an interesting debate in which I'm just thinking about, because he, Navarrete has achieved so much, but he did lose versus Berinchyk, and it was a close fight, but Davis might be able to put on a better performance. Of course, we have to wait and see, but, to now give that kind of wide overview of this fight, of course, Davis is 12-0 with 8 KOs, and Berinchyk is 19-0 with 9 KOs. Like I mentioned, this is for a world lightweight title, the WBO one, to be precise. Davis's last fight, of course, was a win via KO in round 2 versus Lemos, and Berinchyks' last fight was a win via split decision versus Navarrete. This is in Davis's home country of USA. Berinchyk is 36 and Davis is 25. And to speak about them both individually as fighters, I mean, Davis is a very sharp fighter and he's got excellent back foot timing. He was really showing that a lot versus Lemos, and pretty much every time that Lemos was on rushing forwards, he was really landing them good, well timed shots. And I think in general, his fight IQ has really improved Davis, and you knew that Lemos was going to be coming forwards recklessly, and Davis knew that he could time shots onto him. And even with Lemos having the weight advantage, Davis trusted his power, and he did very well by doing that and landed the consistent back foot timing timed shots, and it was very successful. His accuracy as well. He's got the fast hands. He moves around you very well. He's been seen to do the Matador type style multiple times now, and just in general, that movement is impressive to make the other opponent look silly. He's accurate, he's got good body work, he's got good head movement. His head movement can be excellent when he's really focused and dialed in on it. He can really slip shots, go in for the uppercut as a result, and again, use his speed to make you look silly. He's got underrated power for sure. He's not the biggest guy, he's not the strongest looking guys, but he's definitely got that underrated power, and it's definitely shown that it can last at a world level. He can fight at the mid in close range. He finds his range, in my opinion, very well. He finds angles very well, especially whilst he is on the ropes. Even when he is on the ropes, on that back foot, in a position which for a lot of fighters is uncomfortable, he finds the angles, he works it really well, and he picks his shots very well. He's quite often a combination thrower, which is nice to see. He's got very good punch variety for the most part as well, which is again very impressive, and he's always able to counter very well. Negatives about him, I think he can often throw from quite low down. I think he can be overconfident, and the fact he was dancing around in that last fight of him, if he is doing that and trying to play around with Berinchyk could upset him, land a big shot, hurt him from that. He drops his hands quite often and can admire his work. He needs to make sure that he's always planting his feet at the right times. Sometimes he's not always doing that, and he can get caught with shots as a result of that. And when he is getting caught with shots with his hands being dropped low, it means that he's going to get caught quite clean, and it can hurt him. And even against Lemos, he did get caught at one point just whilst he was dropping him. He did get caught with a shot quite cleanly. He isn't, of course, as physical, and in general isn't really the most physical of fighters, but I don't think Berinchyk is too physical. He does sometimes waste his shots a little bit. Like I say, for the most part, he is accurate, and I don't think he wastes anywhere near. I suppose maybe, he may waste shots a little bit more so than that of Berinchyk, but still, yeah, it's just something that sometimes with his combinations I'd like to perhaps see him clear up. He stands quite tall and close. He can sometimes just walk around with his movement a little bit instead of having that perhaps level of urgency and explosiveness in which he could have. He can lose focus. He doesn't turn into his shots necessarily always that well, and I suppose his power shows that he doesn't really need to, but perhaps sometimes that would be nice to see. And he does have his chin in the air, so again, like I say, his head can be a target to be hit. To speak about Berinchyk as a fighter, he's got a high guard, and for the most part will be sometimes a little bit unorthodox ways, but it is guard. But for the most part, it is, of course, covering his head better than that of Davis. He's explosive in his own right. He counters well. He plants his feet at good times and showed that well versus Navarrete. There was times in which he was able to, utilize a solid head movement of his to be able to just be out of range of shots, plant his feet, and then respond back with a singular shot, which doesn't have too much power, but still was a point scoring shot, and it was a shot in which he was able to have success with on multiple occasions. He does spring off his back foot again well at the same time. That adds to his explosiveness. He can definitely showcase an awkward style for the most part, so I don't believe it is something too similar to that of what Davis has had to deal with. And it was definitely interesting to see the two styles of Navarrete and Berinchyk going up against each other. He's always moving. He's knows how to point score, like I mentioned, and a lot of the Ukrainian top level fighters know how to point score. He punches over the guard quite well. He changes levels relatively well. He has a good work rate and can showcase his work all the way through the World Championship rounds. and he's got a good chin at the same time. So I think it is going to be tough for Davis to be able to get him out of there, but he definitely could do so. Davis. Berinchyks negatives. He definitely has, messy footwork at times, and I feel like sometimes he doesn't necessarily know where he is moving his feet, and sometimes it doesn't look too comfortable. He also looks very uncomfortable when he's on the back foot, and like I say, he can put his hands in a strange positions all over his head whilst on the back foot. He's definitely the less controlled out of the two and has the lesser speed out of the two. He can also come into range and not throw. He can just come into range with his hands up high and not really do anything and then get caught with a shot even though he has his guard up high, which is a bit of a strange thing that he sometimes does. He's definitely quite jumpy in his work as well. He does have a wasteful jab. I don't think he uses it for really doing that much, and he doesn't really land too well with it. He doesn't really put too much of it into his shots, and he definitely throws with singular shots at the same time. And again, it doesn't really seem to really hurt too much when he's doing that. He doesn't really find his range too well. I don't think his balance is always excellent. He definitely does back off if you put it on him a lot. If you put it on him physically, he'll back off, and he does stand straight on as well. Davis is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Davis will win via TKO in round 5. Yes, I've mentioned the fact that Berinchyk does have a good chin, and I believe that's true, but I also think that Davis is going to be able to capitalise upon Berinchyk. I don't think Berinchyk going to be able to have too much success going in with just singular shots. I think Davis's combinations are going to be much more superior. I don't think Davis is going to make the same kind of mistakes in which Navarrete made in the fight versus Berinchyk, where Berinchyk just going to be able to capitalise on that with the singular shots. I think Berinchyk going to have to offer a lot more power-wise to really deter Davis, and I think Davis is really going to be able to land big and catch Berinchyk off with the power. And if he puts Berinchyk onto the back foot, then I think Berinchyk might struggle a bit. And again, like I say, I think Davis has shown that levels of underrated power and will be able to win, like I mentioned, via TKO in round 5, which is a huge statement of victory. He's a world champion at that point, and so who he could go on to fight next, I think, has to be the best options. You can't just put him against a fighter in which nobody's heard of anymore. You have to put him in against some top world level guys at that point. And I think Muratala, that fight for top rank versus top rank, makes sense. I think that would be a great fight to make, and it wouldn't surprise me if that does happen. If not, a Pitbull Cruz fight would be another excellent fight in which I'd love to see, coming off a very well fought contest versus Fierro, which was a great fight, but perhaps might not happen with PBC and Top Rank. We'll have to wait and see. Abdullayev is another good fight. Of course, he lost versus Haney quite a few years ago, but he's been rebuilding out in Russia, had a good win last time out in Argentina, and so that definitely could be a fight to make sense, what to happen. He's another highly ranked in the WBO rankings fighter, or perhaps something like a Lomachenko, of course, IBF champion. We're not really too sure what's happening with him at the moment, but if Davis beats Berinchyk, a Ukrainian fighter, perhaps Lomachenko might be willing to come in, try and contest himself as a Ukrainian fighter against the new up-and-coming kind of crop in the lightweight division, and it wouldn't surprise me if it happens, but we'll have to wait and see, of course. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did indeed like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.